Hello, my friends. I am reporting live from Pawhuska, Oklahoma. And if you don't know what Pawhuska, Oklahoma is, this is where the Pioneer Woman is from. I'm driving home from speaking at a joint OSU K-State, Kansas State extension meeting, and I'm like super repping the orange. It's like no joking today. And I stopped in Pawhuska. Don't tell my husband, but I stopped by here to get his Valentine's Day gift, and I'm bringing home pizzas because there's an amazing pizza shop in this town. So if you hear Red Dirt Country is actually played in the town, like outside the stores. So if you hear country music in the background, welcome to Oklahoma. That's just how it is. I'm recording like answers to y'all questions because you've been amazing and sent me so many questions. So I was like, I'll just take a few minutes here before I get back on the road. So this question is actually from a veterinarian working in South Asia. So I thought this would just be kind of a fun, good interest for everybody. But this individual is working in South Asia, working with small ruminant producers there. And he said the number one problem is knowing how to control them when they seem ever present and seem to reinfect themselves very quickly on overgrazed pastures. I have seen that be a huge problem in developing countries, but it is also a huge problem here in the US. People end up with more goats than what they can have land. But what I've learned in developing countries especially is that the number of animals they have is very related to, or they view it as related to their worth and wealth. And that's probably true here in the US as well. But people, my experience, especially with people who have countries that have previously been under Russian rule, especially, have a real propensity to get way more animals than they possibly can as a means to show off their wealth. And unfortunately, what that means is the animals don't do very well because they nutritionally don't get enough from the land, and then they have huge problems with parasites. And then he goes on to mention, but when farmers raise them on bamboo platforms, they tend to have less parasites. You know, obviously raised up off the ground, maybe where the manure is falling through. That makes a lot of sense. And so I think in the US, I have a decent time convincing people that more animals is not better, and that your animals will do better if there are less of them for a given plot of land. I think that's much more difficult to overcome in developing countries because it's very entrenched that number of animals equals, is equal to wealth. So all we can do is educate them as best they can. It's always nice if you can get a producer anywhere in the world who will buy into your ideas, and then you can use them as kind of a model producer, a teaching producer, to say, look what we've done for him, and now his animals do so much better, those kinds of things. But this is a very challenging idea. I'd love to hear from others who have had success with this, but I beat myself my head up against the wall over this issue too, of convincing people that you have too many animals for the plot of land. And unfortunately, what I find happens is those extra animals weed themselves out. Like, if you don't get rid of the extra animals, they will get rid of themselves, if you get my drift. So that's an unfortunate way to lose them. At least if they cull them, they get some value back. But I find that the extra animals find their own way out. And so I talk a lot to people about, wouldn't you like to choose which animals go, rather than the animals sort of self-selecting about where they're going to go. So that's not a very flowery picture, but it just is what it is. On this same topic, I'm interested in a realistic recommendation for square footage per head for parasite avoidance in sheep and goats. A number that I found with a quick search is 8 to 10 head per acre, but it seems almost excessive and near impossible for most of my clientele. And then there's a second question I'll get to. So with regards to this, I agree. Most of the places that I've looked have been 6 to 8 to maybe 10 at the most per acre. Now, the reason you can't find a good answer for this is that there's not a good answer for this, because it depends on like what kind of grass you have and how sparse the grass is. So the recommendation in Arizona would be different than the recommendation in Kentucky. And so you have to balance nutrition with the parasite density. And so what I would much rather people do than worry about head per acre is worry about rotational grazing. And so you can get away with a lot more head per acre if you will move them. And that comes with it that it means you need to own more land. And so then that kind of puts us back into the conversation we just finished having about this, about people want to have more animals than they have land. But in general, I think I do quote the 6 to 8 per head per acre, or 6 to 8 head per acre. And then you just have to play with that. They have to this is where you're training them how to FOMACHA score, and you're training them how to body condition score, and you're doing all that kind of monitoring monthly. And that way they see, what does 6 head per acre do in my place? How often would I need to be moving them to make that happen? And so this individual, of course, is referencing, like, there's no way my clients can only do 6 to 10 head per acre. And that's when you really have to go back to the first speech I was talking about, which is you either need to get more land, or you need to figure out a way to rotate, or you need to get rid of some animals, or they are going to self-volunteer. It's very harsh, but it's a reality. I mean, I cannot there's no way I can sugarcoat it. Also interested in recommendations for treating pregnant small ruminants if Safeguard isn't cutting it. Pyrantel seems to be something I've heard of using before in these cases. So it's very common to find that Safeguard or Panacure or any fenbendazole product is ineffective. The parasitologist I worked with when I was at Texas A&M said to me once that fenbendazole hasn't killed a goat worm in Texas since 1978. And I think that's true in Oklahoma too. It's probably true in the entire South, I would guess. But I find that fenbendazole is pretty ineffective against trichostrongyles. Where it's effective is stuff like trichuris. Sometimes I will do really high dose fenbendazole for trichuris, but I don't use it to treat the trichostrongyles and homuncus. It just doesn't work. I've never used Pyrantel in small ruminants, so I can't really comment on that. And I think what this veterinarian is referring to is the fact that we can't use albendazole in the first third of gestation. After that first third, I don't have any concerns about using it, and I do find in most farms that albendazole, Valbazin brand name, is more effective. It can retain its efficacy longer on a place than fenbendazole does. And so I think that's worth a shot if you're treating them after the first third of gestation, but I would not risk it early in the pregnancy. The other things are Cydectin is safe to use during pregnancy. Ivermectin is safe to use during pregnancy. So Moxidectin and Ivomec, I'm getting all my generic names and the brand names mixed up there, but you know what I'm talking about. So you do still have options with regards to pregnant animals. The other thing I find is if the dosing is done correctly, I have not seen issues with levamisole. And I actually think I had another question here coming up where somebody specifically asked about levamisole. So I'm going to go ahead and deal with that now. I have not been very reticent to recommend levamisole in pregnant animals, but I tend to hold levamisole back until I've tried everything else. So I don't end up using it in pregnancy a lot because usually I can either get Valbazin to work mid to late gestation, or I can use either ivermectin or moxidectin. Those are safe to give during pregnancy as well. But I have not heard of issues with levamisole during pregnancy. I have used it during pregnancy in animals. And so I think that that's a reasonably safe way to go if that becomes your last resort. So that'll knock out a few more questions. I still have some more on here, but I'm trying to keep these videos relatively short, and I need to get home. So I'll visit with you all a little bit more over the weekend. Take care.